A few months ago, I heard quite a funny story coming out of India. And the story went this way. This guy had gone for an interview and for a job. And in India, generally, when there's about 10 positions available, about 5,000 will apply. And then they go through the exams, and then they do the interview and all of that. So this group of young guys had been selected for the interview, from whom the final bunch was going to be approved or designated as qualifying for the position. So this one guy goes for the interview and comes back, and as often happens in India, I wouldn't be surprised if it happens here too. One guy went up to him and said, did he finish the interview? He said, yes. He said, what were the questions? What were the questions? He said, well, they told us that the questions are going to be identical for everybody, so not to dare share the questions with anybody. So he said, I'm not allowed to share the questions. He said, okay, don't give me the questions, just give me the answers. So when the guy had gone in, the first question they'd asked him was, when did India get its independence? And this fellow said, it's not right to just spend one day when so many things took place, so many activities, so much action, so many meetings, so many discussions, so many legislations and negotiations and all. But it all finally came together in 1947. He said, oh, that's good. So then they asked him, who is the father of the nation? He said, it's not fair to just pick one particular person. When there are so many people involved in this kind of thing, why do you just have to pin it on one person? Many people were involved in this, so that was his answer. So they said, the third question to you is this: is corruption India's major problem? And he gave them the answer. He said, the Prime Minister has appointed a committee, and it's going to research all of this matter. And finally, after all of the research is done and they come to their conclusion, we'll have a definitive answer to your question. So they were very impressed with this young guy, but he went out and the fellow asked him what the questions were. He didn't tell him the questions, but he gave him the answers. So the second fellow walks in a little later, and they look at him and they're going over the forms, and the interviewing committee says to him, by the way, your form is not complete. What is your date of birth? And he says, it's not right to just pick one day when there were so many days in negotiations and discussions and dialogue and all this that went on. But finally, the date was in 1947. So they look at him and said, really? He said, yeah. I said, what was your father's name? He said, it's really not fair to pick one particular person as my father when there were so many people involved in this coming down the aisle and so on and so forth. So one of the interviewing men said, have you lost your head? He said, well, the Prime Minister's appointed a committee, and once the research is done, we'll be able to come out with a definitive answer. An apology